Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating trip up to the coast of British Columbia to uncover what is, honestly, a delightfully weird piece of history. If you've ever taken a cruise up the Pacific Northwest, you've probably heard a very tidy, highly polished story from a tour guide about a place in Prince Rupert called Cow Bay. But as we all know, history is rarely that tidy, right? Behind the cute name and those neat little stories lies a hilarious, messy, and just deeply ironic reality of exactly how this particular indent on the coast earned its wildly out-of-place moniker. I absolutely love peeling back the layers on local legends, and this one, well, it's a classic case of modern tourism marketing masking an absolute historical disaster.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because the very first thing you notice when you walk into this area of Prince Rupert is the overwhelming bovine branding. I mean, it is everywhere. We're talking about a maritime coastal town in the Pacific Northwest, a place literally known for rain, fog, and fish, and yet suddenly you're surrounded by the distinct pattern of dairy cows. It immediately begs the question, why is this rugged coastal port completely covered in cow spots? Like, what on earth does a dairy cow have to do with a hard-working fishing community?
To give you a sense of just how deeply the town has leaned into this, the area today is an absolute shrine to modern cow kitsch. You literally can't walk down the street without seeing fire hydrants painted white with big black spots. You can sit on cow-spotted benches. You can even grab your morning coffee at a local cafe brilliantly named Cowpuccinos. But here's the thing. This heavy theming is a completely modern tourism-era addition. It's this fun illusion designed to charm visitors, but it creates the perfect setup for the real story we're about to explore, a story that starts way, way before any spotted fire hydrants ever existed. Section 1. Before the cows arrived. Let's look at the deep history here.
Let's move on and see how this builds and strip away all that modern kitsch for a second. If we look at the timeline of this bay, it's essentially a story of incredibly rapid transformation. Long before the 1900s, this little indent on the east side of Cayenne Island wasn't about cows at all, not even close. It was a Tsemsian village known as Wilunu. Then, right around the early 1900s, everything began to shift. The Grand Trunk Pacific surveyors and settlers started arriving with this massive goal of building the railway's Pacific terminus. By 1906, the area was abruptly renamed Cameron Cove.
Let's just pause here and truly appreciate what was here first. Wilanu was home to the Gisboxlutz tribe. This wasn't just some empty cove waiting for industry to show up. It was a vital part of a vibrant, long chain of villages situated all around the harbor. This was a thriving hub where indigenous people wintered and traded. The land and the sea provided this incredibly rich harvest. We're talking salmon, halibut, herring, and seaweed. It was a perfectly adapted, sustainable way of life that was just deeply, deeply connected to the marine environment. Now, what's really interesting about this historical contrast is the stark difference between these two eras. On one side, we have Wilselin, a name and a settlement intrinsically tied to the generations of the Gispaxlowitz tribe who lived off that specific marine ecosystem. On the exact opposite side, we have Cameron Cove. When those surveyors arrived to build the railway terminus, they just stamped a new name onto the map to reflect their new industrial reality. Cameron Cove was named after Sol Cameron, who was the manager of the Westholme Lumber Company. So in just a few short years, the entire identity of this coastal indent was completely rewritten, from an indigenous wintering village to a colonial lumber and railway outpost.
Section 2. The Swimming Dairy Herd. A truly strange sight. So, how exactly do we get from a lumber manager's cove to Cow Bay? Well, it all came down to basic economics and a booming population. Between the years 1906 and 1909, Prince Rupert was a rapidly expanding boomtown going up right around the railhead. And what does a growing boomtown desperately need? It needs food. More specifically, it needed milk. Seeing a golden opportunity, a settler decided to land a herd of dairy cattle right there at the cove, fully intending to corner the market on local dairy supply for all these new railway workers and settlers.
Local retellings almost universally credit this to a Swiss dairyman named John Nearing, who supposedly arrived with his herd around 1908. But here is the absolute best detail, the one that gets repeated by every single tour guide on the coast. When Nearing arrived with his boat full of cows, there was no dock built yet. The infrastructure literally just wasn't there. So, as the story goes, the first herd actually had to be pushed into the ocean to swim ashore. I mean, just picture that for a second. A herd of heavy, bewildered Swiss dairy cows paddling their way through the freezing, frigid Pacific waters onto the rugged shores of Cayenne Island. It is an absolutely wonderful, totally cinematic image. But as with all great local legends, we kind of have to separate the fact from the fiction. When we weigh the polished cruise ship tale against the actual historical evidence, a bit of a gap emerges. The image of the swimming cows is absolutely legendary, and honestly, it's entirely possible that it happened. However, no one seems to have a single photograph of this magnificent bovine amphibious landing. Historians, and even some of the locals, treat the swimming cow detail as a pretty heavy embellishment. But you know what? It completely didn't matter. The imagery was so strong, and the sheer sight of cows in this rough coastal town was so utterly bizarre that the name Cameron Cove was instantly wiped from common speech. It became Cow Bay, and it never ever went back. It just goes to show how one powerful visual image can completely rewrite history, even if it might be a bit exaggerated. Section 3. A historic business failure. Let's talk about some dairy disasters. So the crucial point is, this was a terribly thought-out business plan. I mean, just consider the basic requirements of dairy farming for a second. Cows need dry pasture to stand on and graze, and a business needs cheap local feed to actually turn a profit on the milk. Now, look at the reality of Prince Rupert. It features a notoriously wet coastal climate and a landscape totally defined by saturated muskeg. Now, if you don't know, muskeg is basically a giant bog. It is terribly poor ground for heavy animals that are used to solid, drier pastures. Because the ground yielded absolutely nothing they could eat, every single ounce of feed for these cows had to be imported. The overhead costs absolutely skyrocketed, making the milk incredibly expensive to produce and buy. Unsurprisingly, the dairy itself was an absolute failure, and it happened pretty rapidly. You simply cannot fight the geography and climate of the Pacific Northwest with a herd of Swiss dairy cows. John Naring's venture folded. The cows were gone. But here is the incredible twist of historical irony. The name completely outlived the failure. The business was a bankrupt memory almost as soon as it started, yet the locals just kept calling it Cow Bay. Section 4. A century-old joke. Moving on to modern Cow Bay. Once that ridiculous dairy experiment was finally out of the way, Cow Bay actually found its true calling. It went on to become the hard-working, beating heart of this thriving fishing town. This wasn't a place of cute cow pastures. No, it was a gritty industrial engine. The cove quickly filled up with marine electric shops, highly skilled Japanese boat builders set up their businesses here, and after the First World War, it became the bustling home of the famous mosquito fleet. Small fish plants crowded right onto the wharf. This was a place of true grit, salt, and serious maritime industry. And this brilliantly illustrates the real enduring legacy of the bay. 1922. That is the year a little place called Smiles opened up right on the wharf. It didn't start as some fancy seafood joint. It started as a simple ice cream and hot dog stand to feed the hungry, hardworking fishermen and dock workers. And today, decades after the cows vanished, Smiles is still there. In fact, it holds the title of the oldest restaurant in the entire city. The true history of Cow Bay is written in boat building and fish, definitely not in milk. Which brings us full circle to this incredible realization. The heavy cow theming you see today, the black and white hydrants, the cow benches, the quirky cafes, is essentially a massive inside joke built on top of a 100-year-old business failure. The tourism industry has taken a venture that folded almost immediately due to terrible planning and terrible geography and turned it into the defining aesthetic of a proud fishing community. It is a brilliant century-long joke, and they've totally run with it. And that leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder. Is it better to be remembered for a legendary failure than a boring success? Cow Bay could have easily just been remembered as Cameron Cove, right? Just another generic lumber and fishing port on the coast. But because of one spectacular, totally ill-advised attempt to force swimming dairy cows into a saturated muskeg bog, the town secured a completely unique, unforgettable identity that draws visitors to this very day. Sometimes the mistakes really do make the best stories. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.